You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. And so, again, obviously, we're not live. We warned you guys that this week was going to be a pre-record week, but nevertheless, here we are. We're talking about Star Wars. I'm probably, as we speak, on the chatting with you guys. So that should be fun. But of course, you know, in all the stuff that's been going on, and we've been really dealing with everything from lightsaber combat forms recently to Andor updates to everything else, we actually now have a small but significant update for the upcoming Rey-centric film, which so far has been rumored to be called Star Wars A New Beginning. We'll see if that title sticks, but as of right now, that's probably the best way to refer to it. And it looks like that even though Daisy Ridley hasn't read the script, she heard the story, she knows what the story is, and she said it's not what she expected. So what do you make of that? Like, first of all, what do you think she did expect? Because, I mean, it's like, you know, we don't even really know that, honestly.
Well, I mean, I think the part that we do know, I think she's probably going to rebuild the Jedi Order. That's kind of what Luke was, you know, that was the original plot of what Luke was going to do. But of course, I think, and they kind of alluded to that in the last, was it the Last Jedi? Yeah, Rise of Skywalker. And Rise of Skywalker, it was more so shown, you know, where he was trying to, you know, redo the whole Jedi Order with Kylo. And, you know, he mentioned his failure there and things of that nature. But we never really got a chance to see what that looked like. So I think this is where I think that's where that dream is going to be sort of somewhat realized through Rey. So I think that part is going to be, you know, expected. But maybe there's some twists and turns in that story that she didn't expect. And that's where the good or the bad can reside in.
Yeah, and of course, you know, obviously we're going to get into this a little bit, but I think overall it would be interesting what she expected, because I'm wondering if what she expected is pretty much what we all did, which is pretty much what you just outlined. So either the unexpected parts of this are, okay, it's basically, like you said, rebuilding the Jedi Order, and, you know, obviously somebody will come along to try to prevent that, whether it's another Sith Lord or some other Dark Force user, we don't know. But needless to say, there's going to be some obstacle in her way. It could even be a super powerful officer like Thrawn. It could actually, well, no. He would be long gone by this point, because this is after Episode 9. At least we think he's long gone by this point. I mean, he should be. I mean, he wasn't in the First Order, so either way, there's going to be, it could be a Thrawn-like character maybe, you know, that pops up. But either way, that's what I think that we, and also she, would expect, you know, is that this is the way that it's going to go. So when she said that it wasn't what she expected, and again, we'll get a little deeper into this, it just makes me wonder, well, you know, almost to quote Independence Day, well, which part? You know, I mean, it's like, well, which part isn't what you expected? Is the whole thing not what you expected? Or were there elements of the story in there? Because, and again, it's important to frame this. And this is, like I said, I mean, it's a really small, almost insignificant update, but it does actually give us a little bit of a window into this new film. And the good news is, if she pretty much expected along the same lines of what we would, and it's actually shifting from that, and we could debate whether this is a good or a bad thing, but it shows that maybe it's going to go in a direction that is a little less cliched or a little less obvious.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, you know, with Star Wars is that, you know, a lot of people have been clamoring that says, okay, Star Wars needs new, fresh ideas. And I agree. I think people want to see things that are kind of reminiscent of the original trilogy from which we all kind of fell in love with Star Wars. but I think they want to see Star Wars move in a different direction. The question is, it's like, okay, does it make sense? And is it? And so essentially, I think, in the words of Kylo, you almost have to let the past die, and you have to make Star Wars now for its current consumption, its current fan base. And that's difficult because, see, the problem is that, in which we always allude to on numerous shows, is that George Lucas made Star Wars for him. He originally wanted the rights to Flash Gordon. He couldn't get those, so he was like, well, fine, I'll make my own version of it, and I'll pop Star Wars. And he had no idea that Star Wars would be this cultural phenomenon that it's become. So with that in mind, it's like, okay, it starts at its inception. Like, okay, are you trying to make your own serial, or are you trying to redo Star Wars? And that's where you have, first of all, you have to ask yourself the question, because then now it's like, all right, if you're going to try to redo Star Wars in a new way, what things are you keeping? What things are you getting rid of and expanding upon? Or are you getting rid of anything? Or, what I mean? Like, you have to make those decisions out the gate, number one, because you have to figure out, what are you doing? What are you really trying, what are you really trying to accomplish here? And for who? What I mean? Like, of course, obviously Star Wars fans, and that's kind of the problem, because Lucas always kind of made these stories for himself. The fans just happen to latch onto him and agree with it and like it. It's a different thing now when it's a business, and now you're trying to basically make products that fans want to see. And then, of course, with that in mind, you're going to eventually alienate some people, because everyone's going to want something different,
Yeah.
So there lies the big problem, the elephant in the room, shall we say, is like, okay, what does it look like? But in my personal opinion, I think Star Wars needs to come with something fresh, something new, but it still needs to have that same feeling as Star Wars. And I think that's what a lot of people are really asking for. If I'm interpreting things correctly, I think they want something, new stories, new challenges, and new ideas. However, it needs to still have that same feeling that Star Wars gives you. And that is the ultimate question.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a bit to unpack there. I mean, after all, first of all, you have to look at it from the fact of what makes Star Wars Star Wars. So you don't want to necessarily reinvent it. You don't want to redefine it. Because one of the things that Lucas did, even though he made it for himself, was he made it timeless. And he also made it it's this cross-generational, like, it appeals to everybody because of its timelessness. It's the fact that it's timeless, that there's something in there that everybody, no matter, whatever race, culture, religion, economic status. I mean, it just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter generationally when you were born. I mean, there's something that speaks to everybody in there because of its timelessness. And one of the things that I think is a danger is that if they try to, and again, we've talked about this before, where it's like, these guys are trying to recreate the magic. It's like making a video go viral. You can't really do that. It has to be an organic thing. And that's how Lucas approached it, was he basically did what he wanted, being the master storyteller that he is. And then people came along for the ride. And of course, he created this wonderful universe, that pretty much is this giant sandbox where everybody can play. Because you can create a bunch of different things. And I think that this is where you're going with this, is the fact that you don't necessarily have to reinvent Star Wars. All you have to do is just create new stories, create new characters, keep the same. I mean, I hate to break it down to a formula, but it sort of is, because that's basically what Lucas did. He took a lot of the classic storytellers and he was basically like the Bruce Lee of storytelling, right? He took all these different
Mhm.
things and he created this amalgamation of timeless storytelling that again has stood the test of time. Now, the twofold problem you have in there is that one, Disney is looking at this from a business perspective before they're looking at it from a timeless story perspective. And this is even true in their other properties as well. I mean, they're going back now and they're trying to remake all their classic movies, but they're trying to reinvent them for this current, woke audience or whatever. And the problem with that, I mean, there's a lot of problems with that, but the main problem with that, the long-lasting problem with that, is you're basically going to pigeonhole these things into this time period. And 20, 30, 40 years from now, people might not be able to relate to it. But you know what? They can relate to the original Disney cartoons that were made in the 30s because it's timeless.
Mhm.
And so instead of letting marketing determine the stories, instead of letting marketing determine the direction of character creation, world building, all this other stuff, they should just do what we had talked about for years, and that is just create really good, timeless stories within the parameters that Lucas set up within the universe, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean that's really the heart of it all, and I think that's unfortunately comes, that's an unfortunate byproduct of um well, we've seen a lot of different areas where it's, for example, Eric and I live in Detroit, Michigan, in that area, so we're dealing with the big three with a lot of the automotive stuff. So there's the competition of like, okay, sometimes where you have these giant companies and they're like, okay, they're not necessarily always competing, trying to make the best vehicle. They're trying to one up the other companies in a way. Instead of just making the best vehicle, that will inevitably 9 times out of 10 probably one up the next company. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is Eric and I both come from the education world, and one of the worst things that they had was like, it's like, all right, well, we're going to we're going to judge you based on your test scores instead of saying like, okay, how about we just train the student with the information, that way they can be comfortable taking a test instead of teaching them the test, and then now they really don't have any substance behind it. And that's kind of what we're seeing with Disney, especially with a lot of their different properties, not just Star Wars but Marvel as well. And it's one of those things where you're trying to cater to certain groups to get a certain reaction or a certain pop, versus like, okay, if you, like you said, Eric, if you make timeless story, you just focus on the roots of it all, the tree will take care of itself. You just have to give it good roots, almost like a Miyagi type thing. But
Yeah, I was gonna say we're getting a little bit into the Karate Kid Cobra Kai thing, but that's okay because there is a successful franchise. Actually, that is a
yeah, exactly.
franchise that, and again, this is very important to note, right? Because Will Smith and his production company acquired the rights to Karate Kid,
Hmm.
and so even though he didn't really have a huge hand in making Cobra Kai, he pretty much, that production company oversaw it, and you had these creators come in, and they were fans, much like Filoni and Favreau are with Star Wars. They were fans, but the difference is they took the source material, they expanded it, but they kept the same type of storytelling, and it ended up perfectly functioning exactly as it is, where it's pretty much the ongoing saga of these characters from the original films with the addition of a new generation. I mean, honestly, if Star Wars had just done what Cobra Kai did, they would have been in great shape, but they didn't. Because if you think about it, and this just occurred to me like now, and that is that you still have all the legacy characters in Karate Kid. Because a lot of times
Hmm.
people are like, well, we don't want to focus too much on Han, Luke, and Leia and all that. It's like, well, I mean, really, the way that Cobra Kai handled it was great because they pretty much started out continuing the story of the legacy characters, and then they began introducing the newer generation of characters and how they fit into the world of the legacy characters. And then as a
Hmm.
result of that and good writing, what ended up happening was you started naturally getting a development of the newer characters with their own storylines. And now, as the seasons went on, you basically have the intertwining still of the legacy characters and the newer ones, but you also have two simultaneous storylines or story threads, really, because they have storylines within each one. And they're able to mesh perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great example, and that's one of the things that we're hoping for Star Wars. That Cobra Kai gave us a lot of fresh ideas. It put things in a modern. It kept the same feel and the spirit of the original, but then it also advanced it in a way that was organic.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
pretty that's what we're looking for in Star Wars. I know with this particular film on the horizon, there's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of talk about who's going to be in it, who's not. Um, there's some speculation, well, that we've talked about the Poe Dameron, played by Oscar Isaac. Isaac. Originally, Oscar Isaac said he didn't want to do it because it kind of burned him out, but now he's more open to returning to it. There's rumors also that John Boyega is going to return, but when he returns, he's going to actually talk about some of those force ability, and maybe that's the unexpected thing, is that maybe they're actually going to reveal that he has the force, or that he has, he's more sensitive to it. And maybe that might be part of the storyline as well, that Daisy really was referring to.
Yeah. I mean, we could
So
get into
do you
this
think,
basically.
yeah, I mean, because I think, like, that's what this whole thing is going to decide if it's going to be successful or not. Is the story. All right.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then if this is going to be, so far, and Days really has kind of just said it this way, which I'm glad, that they're not calling this a trilogy yet. She just says this is this one storyline that she's aware of. And maybe they're getting away from this, might be a one off. We don't know. Um,
Oh, I
they're
really hope
probably
it
going to
is.
decide. They're probably going to decide, once this film takes, and we know what's probably going to happen. If this does really well, they'll probably try to make it a trilogy.
Well, but they don't
If
necessarily
not,
have to, though. Because here's the
they
thing,
don't
right?
have
Like,
to, but they're
well,
probably going to because they're greedy.
but I mean, they could do it without necessarily being a trilogy. There's nothing wrong with follow up films. Look at James Bond. I mean, sure, you could more or less argue that they're individual stories, because really the only way that you would really need to make this an actual trilogy is if you had a story that's one giant story that you then break up into 3 films. That really is
Mhm.
that's what a trilogy is. It's an
Definition.
act 1, 2,
Yeah,
and
it's a
3, right?
definition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the problem is, if you do this whole wait and see approach, it'll even be worse than the sequel trilogy. Because now you won't have a plan, you won't have a story, you're almost like adding on, it's almost like retrofitting something versus actually planning and creating it.
Unless they do the actual George Lucas part where they actually create a big story and see what this first half does.
They could do
And
that, yeah. But
if it doesn't work, then you can just say, just make this film where it could kind of have a buttoned in,
mm-hmm.
or it could go, like A New Hope did. So it could, if they want to keep it in the spirit of, George
Well, and
Lucas.
you're absolutely right. They could do that, right? They can actually write a self-contained story that could expand into further films. Then they could actually plan what those films might look like, but then only release the first one that's like, all right, this has a definitive beginning and end, so if it doesn't do well, we could just jettison this and move on to something else, or we have the option of continuing the story. Because everybody forgets that even though Lucas famously had 9 or 12, depending on, which articles you believe from back then, but he basically had this thing as one big giant film that he then broke up into parts because it would have been too long. And then, of course, he chose A New Hope. He chose that section of it to release because it had a definitive beginning and end. But here's the interesting part. So he had that. And this goes into what you're talking about. But he had a built-in backup plan. Because the whole idea was, if Star Wars didn't do as well, and, it just basically failed, it would have been, well, okay, he's not going to have the money to do The Empire Strikes Back. He's not going to have the money to do the real sequel he wants to do. So the plan was to make Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which, of course, later became the novel, but it was actually a backup script in case Star Wars didn't do well. Instead of making Empire Strikes Back, he could just make this. So they could almost do something that is very similar, right? Where they can have like a big story and go, okay, if this first part does well, then we'll go on and we'll make the rest of the story. If not, maybe we'll just have a couple of backup things. Or because now you don't have to worry about everything having to be a trilogy per se, you could just make it a standalone film. I personally think, for a while anyway, they should just make standalone films. There's no reason why you can't continue the story. Like, let's say, okay, Rey does whatever, she goes against whomever and wins, or maybe, that person goes off, kind of like how Vader was off spinning in the TIE fighter, and we're like, well, wonder where he's going to be. You can have something like that. And then you can follow that up with another movie, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a trilogy per se. It could just be a follow-up. Or maybe you can make a couple of other films and then come back to it if you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible. I mean, there's tons of options on the table. I just hope they just really, once again, just really think this stuff through and not, just in a rush to make another film like they did with the sequel trilogy, and we get a bunch of crap. But speaking of, though, like, so what things, what don't you want to see in this upcoming film? Like, if they're trying to make this whole new beginning, that's their whole tagline basically to this thing, right? You got Rey. Okay, all the legacy characters are now gone, whether literally or in story. All the legacy characters are gone. Now what? Like, what don't you want to see in this upcoming in the new iteration of Star Wars?
That's tough because, your first answer would probably be inclined to be something along the lines of, well, I just don't want to see a retread of anything we've already seen. However, the novels have proven that we could do that. The novels have proven that you can take the familiar, repackage it, because again, when Lucas created this, it was timeless storytelling, right? It was sweeping themes and good versus evil and, hero versus villain, that kind of thing. I mean, it was very broad and it was more thematic than it was literal in that sense. And so it makes sense that you could see a repeat of certain themes. They tried to do that with the sequel trilogy, but the problem was, I think it was so derivative. And then, of course, they ended up going off the rails with it, quite frankly. And then that's what eventually split the fan base. But it's tough to say what I wouldn't want to see, because I'm thinking in terms of things that I wouldn't mind seeing. Like, I would not mind seeing the connective tissue of having Mark Hamill appear as Luke as a Force ghost every once in a while. Or any of the other Jedi for that matter. I think that would be only natural. Because if you're starting the Jedi Order and, you got all these Force ghosts around, obviously they're going to want to guide this. I'm trying to think of, I definitely want to see an interesting villain. And there's so many of them that have been created throughout all the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and I'll just start with the last point you made with the villain. and I work my way back. But the villain, I think that's really going to be a tough one, considering that, like, okay, you have to have someone that's truly formidable for Rey because they've made her so powerful already. Now, this movie, is theoretically 15 years post Rise of Skywalker. So
Yep.
we already knew how powerful she was then. So now you're adding 15 years beyond that. It's like, okay, essentially she's almost like a grandmaster at this point, because
Yeah.
even though she doesn't have the formal training that, or let's just say, I won't say like that Obi-Wan had, but apparently she's adept almost like Luke was. And with little training, and now she has all these books that can guide her. It's like, okay, maybe she can get to becoming a grandmaster in the Force sooner. You know what I mean?
Might as
So
well. She was certainly a Jedi Master sooner.
yeah, that's basically what, because in Rise of Skywalker, that's almost, even though she exhibited very Jedi Knight behavior,
Mm-hmm.
or she didn't have the confidence to me as a Jedi Master would, like a Jedi Master should.
No, but I mean, she basically
But
had
she
what it
had the
was.
abilities of a
Yeah, she
master, but
had
she
the
didn't have
abilities, but right, without the control
but
and
she
the
did
discipline and
without
the
the control and
experience and yeah.
all of that, right? So, because we could, like, she looked like how Luke did in Empire,
Yep.
as opposed to how Luke was in Return of the Jedi, and he wasn't even a master then; he was just a knight. But you could definitely tell that there was, just like Anakin. Anakin was a knight in Revenge of the Sith, and he wanted to become a master at that point. He felt like he was ready, and arguably, you could make the case whether he was or wasn't. But you could definitely see the growth in Anakin between um Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, just like we saw with Luke, Empire, and Return of the
Mm-hmm.
Jedi. But I can't necessarily say the same for Rey from Last Jedi to Rise of Skywalker. I can say ability wise, like, yeah, she was able to do cooler things, but as far as having that leadership, having that confidence, having that experience, I don't see that in her yet. So, but when you take it 15 years beyond, it's reasonable, definitely, that she could be a master at that point. But a grandmaster, even then, I'm not so sure. Ability wise, yes, but in all areas, I don't know. But I'm sure that's probably what they're going to make her. But the thing is, like, okay, so one, you have the villain. So if we're talking about a villain, has to be super powerful to even hold a foot candle to what the Rey's abilities are. So that's one. And I'm really interested if it's going to be, doesn't necessarily have to be a Sith Lord. I don't know if I want to see a Sith Lord. I mean, I kind of do, but I kind of don't, just because that's what I'm kind of conditioned to. And I think Sith Lords are cool, honestly. But I am curious to see if they would try to go another route, like if they use like a Green Gear or the Denial or something like that. Like if they use something like a creature or something like that, that might pose a bit of more of a threat, or has a different type of an ability that's um, outside of the Force. So maybe like the Force has to contend with something outside of it, but that's just as powerful as the Force. You know what I mean? Almost like a magic in a way, like true magic. If
Well,
that
like I
makes
said, I
sense.
mean, even somebody like Thrawn, I'm not saying him specifically, but somebody like that.
Right.
And again, I mean, and this goes back to my point. There have been so many cool Sith Lords that were not derivative of what we've already seen that exist in canon now. And in fact, there are ones that exist even, I guess, in the expanded universe in what would be this timeline that you could always bring in. It's almost like an alternate universe, right? Then
Hmm.
there's, of course, people like, who was the villain in A New Dawn? It was a Count. Hold on. Vidian. Count Vidian. He was really cool. he kind of had he was metallic. He had almost like this Destro vibe to him, and with a little bit of Grievous, but he was, I mean, he was pretty formidable. I mean, he was just like somebody that was not like anything we've seen before in the Star Wars universe, and he was really interesting. Then of course you also have people like Dryden Voss, right, who pretty much had Maul backing him up until, of course, he was killed, and then Maul took over, and then of course you have somebody like Maul, who was a former Sith Lord, who then became something else. He essentially became a dark force wielding crime boss. You also had the Hutts. You have a bunch of people that can cause trouble for a Jedi, for all this stuff, because, or you could even go back, you started mentioning, the Drangir. There's obviously, we had talked about the Yuuzhan Vong before, where they don't necessarily have to use them. They could use the Grisk. The Grisk pretty much exist in this realm, in this time period as well. You can mine a bunch of different villains that are interesting. They don't all have to be. And it's like, for the love of all that's holy, don't give us another relative or, somebody.
Right.
I mean, the only way that I would let it go, which is a way that they could sort of tie in the expanded universe, is if they decided to canonize Jason Solo and just be like, well, he kind of ran off or whatever, but now he's back. They could do something like that as well. But again, even in the expanded universe, you had a ton of really cool villains in there that they could either just directly lift and canonize, or they could end up pretty much basing a new villain off of that template. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. You don't have to be derivative about it.
I also think, well, if you want to kind of create, so almost an updated, so, and this leads into my next, my next point is, so with Rey, we know basically in theory that her role is to restart the Jedi Order. Now, on her side of things, I'm curious to see, like, okay, what is she taking? Now, this is where I think a good Luke part will come into play, because he can kind of guide, or maybe even Yoda, if Yoda popped up, because they more or less can guide her in the sense of, like, okay, here were the failures of the Jedi. Here's what we did wrong. Like, we didn't allow people to love. We didn't allow people to, do this. And that might have driven people more towards the dark side, or we tried to control too much of things. Like, okay, let's try to find out of these younglings, and let's kind of, like, who are force sensitive, let's keep them to ourselves, let's raise them as, as little monks, and then they'll grow up and we'll detach them from love and all these other unnecessary emotions, and we can create this whole little community of Jedi that follow these strict guidelines and rules. The problem is like, all right, well, as Snoke so adequately put, when darkness rises, light rises to meet it. So it would think it happens vice versa too. So if you have too much light, something dark has to challenge it. And I think that's the part that a lot of the Jedi would kind of take for granted. And of course, they're trying to stomp out the darkness, but they have to understand that that's part of the balance of the Force. Like, you almost have to have it in a way.
Well, I hate to bring this up. I mean, this could be like an Andor David thing with you, but they could even take a page out of Visions. They could. There's a lot of really cool villains in there. There's a lot of, like, dark, basically like a characters with a dark energy, a dark Force-like ability. Some people were actually dark side users. Some were Sith in there. They were all very inventive and creative.
Well, that's where I was going with my next point, was that, like, okay, so we know for Rey, she's trying to rebuild the Jedi Order, but I think she's trying to revamp it in a way where it's like, okay, it's not so stringent, and then maybe we have somebody who finds Sith holocrons, and it's like, okay, I
Oh,
want
trying
to
to
kind of
rebuild the
bring,
Sith?
but rebuild the Sith, but not with the whole rule of two thing. Like, let's do
Right.
something where it's like, okay, you know what? And almost kind of like blur those lines a little bit. I think that would make things a little bit interesting because it's not so much that we're trying to be evil; we just don't want to be confined.
Mm-hmm. No, that
And
would actually be really interesting because that
and
would
so I
almost
think,
be bringing
yeah,
it back to the old Sith, before the Rule of Two happened. And so you got,
exactly.
that character who was very much a Rey-like character on the Sith side of things, was trying to
Hmm.
rebuild that. She's rebuilding the Jedi Order. But here's the only issue, though. And it really makes me wonder if things have changed at this point. Because when this movie was originally announced, it was not supposed to be Rey-centric. In fact,
Hmm.
it was reported that Rey would be in it, but she wouldn't be the central character.
Right.
And I wonder if it's changed, and maybe that is also something that was unexpected.
Could be. It could be. I mean, I think there's a lot of different things about this that's going to have us kind of like, on pins and needles because um, of course, we don't know what the script is. She at least knows what the general story is.
Right.
She just doesn't know the script. So, um, but then, now we have to worry about the director, and once again, Star Wars doing it again. They bring people into the project and then they take them away and then replace them with other people. And so they've already done that so far with this race story already. And it's just, once again, it just kind of makes you wonder, like, okay, is it, what is it? Like, is it, I mean, of course, we kind of figure it's Kathleen,
It's
but
incompetence. Yeah, that's what it
yeah,
is.
I mean, but it's like and you're trying to figure out, like, all right, is it the directors or the people they're trying to bring in? Are they just getting other projects and they're just like, oh, much rather do this? Because quite frankly, I get it now. Like, a lot of directors now don't want to touch Star Wars because it's almost like, if it's bad, it's like, now I've ruined, this whole thing, and they don't want to be associated with that. But it is a good challenge that's like, ooh, if I can save it though, it's like, if it could be turned, it'd be a
I know,
powerful
it's almost like
ally.
it's very Star Warsian in its way.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So it's one of those things where that's the temptation of this fruit, of Star Wars, is that, you know, it there's good and evil that could come with it. Um
You know
and
who the
that's
latest guy is, don't you?
yeah, they just, well, there's a director. Well, we got the director, but then there's like writers that were changing.
Well, no, but I mean the latest guy that has announced interest in making a Star Wars film is a guy that just did Godzilla -1. I forgot his name,
Oh,
but
okay. No, I didn't hear that
that
one.
movie is getting incredible buzz on it, and he's supposed to be like some incredible. I'm not really sure what else he's done. I haven't really looked it up, but yeah, he's saying he would really like to make a Star Wars film. So they're
Well, and
out
that's the
there.
thing. Like, yeah, well, like, for example, like Charmin Chinoy, like, okay, accomplished director, but primarily doing, like biographies and documentaries and stuff like that. Don't know if you really can handle Star Wars.
Yeah, what would be awesome is that they made a Star Wars film that was in a documentary style.
Oh my god. Yeah, you talk about dividing the fan base. It's obliterating.
Well, I
Things
mean, if
gonna
you're
blow up worse than
talking
the Death Star.
if you're talking about well, wait a minute though. You're talking about genre film. That's because the other one that I actually thought would be intriguing. It's a genre that we haven't even really talked about. You could probably connect it to horror because I mean that's usually what it is. But like a found footage Star Wars film would be kind of
Oh,
interesting.
like the Blair Witch Project type
Well, I
thing,
mean that's the one
or
that everybody goes to. But I mean there's a lot of them that are really
like
good.
Cloverfield, or
Cloverfield's another
stuff like.
good one. Hell House LLC is actually a very underrated, underappreciated one. I mean, anybody that hasn't seen that should immediately go and see it. In a lot of ways, I think that's how found footage should be done. There's also another one recently, and I can't remember the title. So if anybody knows, put it in the comments. I watched it. I even watched its sequel. I can't remember the name of the movies, but basically it's about like this podcaster or whatever that goes out to report on some murder in the Las Vegas desert, and he himself gets killed, and it's like a found footage thing, and there's this whole mystery surrounding it. It's really, really well done. But it just shows that even something, because the found footage genre was really considered stale after a while, but you still have these writers and directors who are able to use that and make a really good quality film on a style that was basically considered stale. And this is something that you could do with Star Wars too. I mean, we always say, well, they shouldn't retread familiar ground and all that, but then again, in the hands of the right director, it might be fine.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm kind of curious about this about Charmaine, is because it's like, if you're primarily known for like, documentaries and stuff like that, like, okay, Star Wars has a lot of different elements to it. You got a lot of CG stuff. Like, if you've never directed anybody in those type of environments and you don't know what that, it's
Well, yeah, I know, right? You're just
it can
suddenly
be problematic. That's
Yeah.
what I'm saying. Like, if you and and once again, of course, Kathleen's like, because what's her name, dropped out from her film. Basically, now this woman will become the first female Star Wars.
Oh,
And
you're
once
talking about
again, it's
Patty
just like
Jenkins, when Patty
Patty
Jenkins'
Jenkins,
thing
yeah,
was the
yeah,
Rogue Squadron.
War-
Yeah.
yeah. So it's like, okay, once again, you're on this whole female kick, and it's just like, stop, just forget all that. Just find out a good director. I don't care if it's a 9-year-old kid. Like, if he's the best director,
Well, at this point, I think a 9-year-old kid probably would be the best director.
you know what I mean? That's what I'm just saying. Is this like, oh, is it a woman? Are they gay? Are they straight? Like, who cares? It's like,
yeah, I know that.
just
Well,
give
that's
me
what
a
I'm talking
good,
about.
like,
That's
and
primarily my point.
yeah, it's
Make
yeah, we
make
don't
them
care
gay
about
and
that.
lame, as they say in the Panderverse thing. It's kind of like,
it's
right, like these stupid things that have nothing to do with filmmaking at all. It's like those have become the main qualifications to make the film. And it's like, no, just find the
yeah,
best director for that particular project. And don't worry about any of the other ancillary stuff. What gender they are, what their sexual orientation is, their political leanings, religion,
exactly.
none of that. It's like, don't worry about any
Yeah.
of that. Just get a director in there that knows how to make a good Star Wars film. Not just a good film, a good Star Wars film.
Exactly. So those are some of the things that I'm really concerned with when it comes to this whole new Ray movie that's supposed to come out. And in theory, I think it's going to be the first one. The first one is supposed to come out in May of 2025.
Oh, really?
So-
So is it, well, because here's the thing, and this is another thing that's been bothering me too. They have not really released an upcoming schedule. Like, okay, we have dates. We know there's going to be one in. Is it 25? Which one's
25?
When is the one where it's back to back? One of them's.
It's 3. There's films that they've already just made. Just
Yeah.
this Ray-centric film.
Right, the New Dawn
There's
one, which
the
is
New Dawn one. There's the James Mangold one. That's the
that
New
is
Dawn.
the New Dawn one. Yep.
Yeah, and then the third.
Yeah, you're right. There is another one out there somewhere, but they keep bringing things back and forth, right? Like every once in a
Yeah.
while, you hear the Taika Waititi movie, the Kevin Feige one. That's been killed. That's no longer
That's
a
been
thing.
killed. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're right. There is another one out there somewhere But see, that's my point. My point is, okay, we have these dates. I thought it was 26. I thought they were releasing one like in May of 26 and then another one in December of 26 that we were
And
supposed
that
to
might
get.
be-
Yeah. And then
I got my years mixed up, but that could
well,
be it.
exactly. Of course you're going to get your years mixed up because they're not clarifying. Because remember, and again, look, there's some things that legitimately did stall things, right? COVID actually put a big damper on a lot of their plans. And then when, the writer's strike and SAG strike happened, that pushed things around a little bit. So I get that. I mean, there are some legitimate things that did get in the way of this production. But I can't stress enough. The fact that they're not giving us all this stuff tells me that they don't really have a plan. Because they don't know. If they knew, we would know.
The Filoni one.
Right. The Mandoverse one, yeah.
The Mandoverse one.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. So, Lucasfilm, so you're right, Eric, 2026. So, May 27th, 26th, 26th, and 17th, 2027.
Yeah, see, they were pretty close to each other.
Yeah, so you got one in May, but I think May is going to be the race-centric one. I think December is going to be Dawn. It's the James Mangold one, and I think December 2027 is the Filoni one.
Right. Yeah, that could be. That could very well.
Which would make sense because it would make more sense because Filoni's stuff is still contingent upon the stories he's telling within the Disney Plus series, because he still has season 4 of Mandalorian he's got to tell. He's got, so there's still, he has season 2 of Ahsoka, so he's got to kind of migrate and those stories out first before. So that would make sense that would be the last one that he does.
Mm-hmm.
That's done, I should say. So, but Ray, because that's the one that's kind of been talked about the most and it has the most. Obviously, there's a script apparently out there for it already, so that one has more headway. So that it stands to reason that the May 22nd, 26th, that's going to be the Ray movie. And
yeah, but it would just be nice to get right. But it would be nice to get confirmation.
Yeah,
because that would tell me there's a plan in place. Now I understand that you could have an independent, like the release schedule and the whole creative part may be mutually exclusive, or at least mostly exclusive. I'll concede that. However, judging by the past track record, it just seems to me like, look, these guys maybe don't really know. They don't seem to know. Like, well, I don't know what's going to come out. I mean, it's weird because they're booking the time, so they know something is going to come out on those dates, but it's almost like, well, we'll just see which project is further along and, how many directors I fired. Like, whoever can get completed first in spite of my micromanaging. That's what it almost seems like to me. I hope I'm wrong, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, that's the problem. We really don't know what they're doing over there. I mean, you want to have high hopes for these films and products because we love Star Wars so much, and I know a lot of times it sounds like we're trashing them almost in a way, but it's partially their fault though. It's like we wouldn't have to.
Oh, it's all their fault. I mean, if you think back to when we started this show way back, our first real episode, past the whole, hey, this is who we are and this is why you should listen to us. The first legitimate audio-only podcast when we started this was a review of The Last Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, okay. But then, we naturally had all the other Star Wars stuff, and we did like the movie. Once we processed it and figured out where we actually, where the whole thing sat in the entire franchise, we finally said, okay, yeah, we really liked the movie. It was a good movie. It did a lot of great things. There were a lot of problems, though. We were honest about that. But the problem is that we did have really good vibes about Star Wars the whole time. We weren't trashing it, but you're right. I found that as time has gone on, we actually trash it more. And, we used to be the ones that would be defending it.
Yeah.
When everybody would misunderstand it. And that's because it used to be Star Wars fans against all non-fans.
Yep.
I mean,
Star
I
Wars
hate to
fans versus
put,
everybody.
yeah, I mean, I hate to put it, it sounds a little juvenile, but it really comes down to the fact that people would make fun of it, not really understanding its depth, its richness. I mean, you still get that. I mean, every
Hmm.
time somebody, is talking to me and, somebody else will be like, oh, well, he has a Star Wars podcast, I mean, I almost feel the pocket protector and horn rim glasses and, you know, I mean, I almost like just feel the nerdiness and geekiness when you say that out loud. But the
Hmm.
truth is, there's a lot of really good reasons to have a passion for this franchise. It's just that lately there's been a lot of missteps where I don't care how much of an apologist you are for this franchise, you can't overlook it anymore. I mean, it's become so
Right.
obvious. And like you said, because of Kathleen Kennedy herself, it's affected all the franchises. I mean, Marvel is all but destroyed. It's hanging on by a thread. Nobody even cares anymore. I haven't even watched a lot of the. Now, I care about Loki season 2. I really want to see that because the first season was incredible. But I still haven't seen the third Guardians of the Galaxy movie. I haven't seen Wakanda Forever. I haven't seen the Marvels. Uh,
Hmm.
there's like a bunch of them I haven't seen, and I'm not in any hurry.
Yeah.
Or 10 years ago, I was marking
Yeah.
the new Marvel movie release on a calendar somewhere and trying to see it on opening day.
Yep.
But, this is what they've done to the franchise. And I'm afraid that that's what's happening with Star Wars as well, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I really hope
Yeah. I
that
mean,
this new beginning thing is even if that's not
really
the
lives up to
title.
its name.
Yeah, I hope
Yeah.
that even if that's not the title, I hope that really is what this becomes, a new beginning.
Hmm. Yeah, I think we need to see. We don't need to see another Death Star. We don't need to see.
Oh man, yeah.
It's just like we don't need to see like another um or Death Star like thing. I mean, I think that we need to once again move beyond all of that, and it's like okay, come up with something new and fresh because then now it does seem like okay, we just keep doing the same thing. It's like a rinse and repeat type thing where you know. I was watching the Lions game earlier today, and it was kind of like irritating me because,
Mm,
when I as a fan, and of course, I haven't played the sport in like probably like 20, almost like 20 years now. It's like, but when I can still sit there and diagnose, and I can figure out, okay, you're about to throw the ball to this person already, and lo and behold, that's where the ball is going. It's just like, okay, like when I can do that, like it's no longer really a fun game because I like the surprise. I like feeling like, okay, I wonder what play they're going to run. I wonder. And then they did a play where I didn't expect them to do, and I was like, jumping. I was like, all right, yeah, that's what I'm talking about. I'm excited again, and that's how we want to feel about Star Wars. It's like, okay, yes, give us the familiar, but at the same time, like, make it so it's new enough where it's like, okay, we're back in the for you, Eric, being that 7-year-old kid sitting in the theater, like, okay, what am I about to see? And then leaving the theater also as a 7-year-old kid, like, okay, now you want to go out and buy a bunch of crap because you just love the film so much. And that's where all of us want to be. That's where we all kind of desire from this franchise. And I think that they just really have to play it. I don't want to say safe, but they really have to pay attention to um, the nuances of Star Wars to really make this film come out the gate swinging, to restore, to really make it a beginning and restore like the faith that people have in this franchise. Otherwise, just like you said a second ago, it's going to die out, and I'm afraid the same is going to happen with Marvel. Until people realize like, okay, we have to create a new thing that make people care again.
yeah, well, I'll tell you this. I don't it gets frustrating because I don't really want to become the podcast version of the string quartet playing on the Titanic as it sinks. And that's
Right.
essentially what's happening, right? I mean, we're
Right.
hoping, but it's like, the franchise is now, it's not there yet, but I always look at the analogy in Revenge of the Sith when they were flying the ship into Coruscant, and at first, okay, once it took a few hits, it's like, all right, whatever. We're probably at the point now where it's still intact, it's still flying, but there's some fires breaking out, like a lot of them.
Mhm.
And we're gonna get to the point where, the destruction keeps
It's only
going. Yeah,
half a ship.
yeah, exactly. And it's like it's funny because when you're doing these Star Wars shows like we do, like a lot of guys on YouTube are doing, it's almost like you're commentating on the destruction of a childhood favorite and something that's been there through everything. And it's almost like, right there to the end. And it doesn't have to be. That's what's really sad about this, is that it really doesn't have to be this way. And it would just be nice for something to come out and going, yes, kind of like we talked about jumping up and down because of a play you didn't expect it. Here's what's funny about that analogy, though. Now, if they did a really slamming movie, it would be unexpected.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
It used to be the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Like every time you went to see anything that had the Star Wars name on it, you just expected it was going to be amazing and it was going to wow you and you were going to, it was going to be really hard to hold on until the next release.
Yep.
And it's just, and again, I mean, I don't know. I think if you took it from, a macro standpoint, I think the Disney Plus shows have helped. But there's a lot of times where I go, I could go the other way on that, because if they had just left it at the Rise of Skywalker and it's like we just been waiting 5, 6, 7 years for another film, it's like, okay, by now the bad taste in our mouth from the Rise of Skywalker and Last Jedi would have gone away. But because they have all these disappointing shows, it's like it keeps reopening the wound. On the other hand, you get something like, say, season 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian, and you go, oh, well, Star Wars is kind of back on track. And, so I mean, it could either heal the wound or it could reopen the wound. And that's why they really have to be careful about what they do on Disney Plus. A lot of times I think they go, the films are the main thing. Nobody cares, but they don't understand. It's really going to hurt the franchise if they keep releasing weak shows or weak content.
Period.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes for everything. And that's the thing, is like you have success with the books, the comics, those are successful and riding high. It's just the visual medium, which Star Wars started off in, is one that's failing. And we're all kind of having that same look that Yoda had on in Empire when Luke goes to raise the X-Wing out the swamp, and he has this, his eyes are wide, his ears perk up. He's like, yes, he's getting it. And then you're left with that disappointment, like, and then it's like, and then now we feel like Luke, I mean, not Luke, but we feel like Yoda, when Kathleen Kennedy's like, oh, we tried to do this. And it's like, well, that is why you failed. It's because it's like you're trying to recreate something instead of just telling a good story and making something good. But I really hope, that this Rey centric movie, I mean, I love Daisy Ridley. I think she's a beautiful young woman. She's spry. She's fun. I think she loves Star Wars. I mean, I remember seeing like her excitement when she, like those first opening shots. Remember we saw like when Force Awakens was about to open, and they showed the reactions of Daisy and John Boyega, like when they saw like finished product.
When Boyega was flipping over his couch and
flipping over the couch, and they're all excited, and it's just like, okay, that's the excitement we want to have, man. It's like that was a fun time when we didn't know what was to come, of course.
Yeah, and now it's a newer hope, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing about it, and this is what's so funny, is the fact that, there's still, another one of my lights went out again. Ugh. But there's still this whole issue of you have these characters, you have these worlds, you have all of this stuff. And because of that, I think that fans like you and I can actually go in and glean stuff from it, right? Like we could still go, okay, even
this
though
was good. That
yeah, like maybe the thing is at best weak, or maybe it totally sucks. We'll still enjoy it though from a certain perspective, because there's still story, there's still moving forward with the characters, they're still putting in the characters that we love, so we can glean some enjoyment out of even the weakest Star Wars. But that's not really a fun place to be, and on top of that, it's also not it's not very good marketing either. That's the problem. You know, they're trying so hard to market this thing. Like we said at the very beginning of the show, it kind of bookends it actually toward the end here, is that, you know, just make good stories with these characters that are already there. Meaning, and I'm not talking about recycling people, although you could, there's still a whole bunch of expanded universe people you can bring in. You could even just start, it's like, look, if you guys are really bad at this, then just adapt the books into films.
That's what I've been saying for
ages. The stories are there. I mean, well, we've been saying that for decades, even before the show. You know, it's like, look, just, you know, they're
take
there.
The books and just make them
films. Yeah. You know, I mean, obviously you'll
transcribe them to screenplay.
Yeah, get them into a screenplay, right? You know, just do that.
There you go.
Do that for, you know, a few years. Get everybody back on board. Look, I'm sure the way the fan base is now, there's people that are just programmed to hate it at this point. You know, you can come up with, people are always going to rag on something. And you've split everybody, and now instead of Star Wars being this once invincible franchise, now you get people like, this is lame, we don't want it. It's, you know, they've kind of ruined a lot of the goodwill that they're going to have to work very hard to restore. So I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see.
Yeah,
like everything else. You know, but we'll sit here and do some commentary on the slow but methodical destruction of the franchise. No problem. We'll be here for you guys. And then when the franchise is completely destroyed, we can all get on here and just talk about the good times and, you know, reminiscing. When there's no new content on the horizon, we could just, you know, forever dissect all the stuff that we love. I mean, at least there's enough material for that. But I'm hoping that if Daisy is excited, knowing that she also got a lot of blowback from the sequel trilogy herself, I was actually shocked that she was even ready to do it again, you know, because I know she wanted to distance herself from it, but, you know, the reality is, while she's been in some pretty good movies, her film career hasn't exactly taken off, you know, so there probably is a certain amount of that, well, you know, let's see what's going on in Star Wars, you know, because it's like a guaranteed job forever because she's one of the main characters. But still, the fact that she's excited and on board with it is a good sign.
Yeah, well, hopefully as more stuff comes out, we can become excited too, and hopefully once we kind of get more of the story and maybe see some characters and things like that.
Yep, more news. Yeah,
more news, then we can kind of go from there.
All right, well, as usual, it's not about us, it's about you guys. So in the comments section, what do you think is so unexpected about this story? That would be one of the good things that I want to see. And then, of course, you know, I don't know, what would be another good follow-up question to that? Like what else do you want to see in the comments?
Well, I actually want to see, what don't you want to see? Like,
yeah, that's a good one.
Going forward, what don't you want to see going into a new era of Star Wars?
Right. And don't wuss out on the question like I did earlier. Actually put something of value in there. Yeah, no, that's a good idea. So yeah, what do you guys think, is so unexpected about this? And then what don't you want to see in this upcoming thing? Because like you said, they could just start this whole thing from scratch now. They have a wide open palette. But the problem is, if they make a bad one, it's going to poison the rest of them moving forward. So in a lot of ways, this is actually the most important movie because it's going to set the tone and the whole, like the template, basically. So let us know what you guys think of that. Of course, like this video and hit the subscribe button for us. It really does help the algorithm. And of course, we want to bring the kind of content that you guys want to see. So make sure that you let us know, whether that's in the comments section, whether it's on our community tab, whether it's on our Discord, which there's a link in the description. Let us know what you guys are thinking and let us know what kind of topics you want us to cover. Speaking of which, Friday is also going to be a pre-recorded episode. Not really sure. There's a couple of things that we're kicking around. So just, hit the notification bell while you're subscribing and hitting the like button, and then you'll be notified and you'll see what we're talking about. But that'll be on Friday night at 11 o'clock. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the force be with you, always.